Okay, so go for it, Colin, and thanks and welcome everyone. Colin.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to our first virtual UK-Israel Business Breakfast for 2021. And I believe we've got a record attendance of around 80 today. So I hope you're all going to enjoy the session. As we're all painfully aware, it is likely to be some time before we can get back to real life business breakfast meetings with our smoked salmon and cream cheese bagels and face-to-face chats with real people. However, during the restrictions and lockdowns last year, we were not deterred, and thanks to my director, Jane Clines, and the very talented and indefatigable Jonny Ross, our resident facilitator, we hosted 7 online meetings of panel discussions with some excellent panelists and interesting topics. Today's meeting will continue our record of interesting and topical issues, but before welcoming and introducing our eminent speakers, I'd just like to thank our sponsors and partners and to tell you briefly about a new and exciting initiative. Our sponsors and partners are absolutely vital to us being able to continue our operation. So our joint main sponsors are Town Centre Securities, and we're very pleased that Edward's here today, and Big Change, where unfortunately Martin can't be with us today. They're our main sponsors, but we also welcome back our partners, Black Solicitors, Nick Dyson, Chef Works, Paul Gross, Mitchell Wealth Management, Stephen and Charles Mitchell, Sky Group, Mark Rothwell, Fleek Marketing, of course, Jonny Ross, J Life, we've got Elliot Landy with us, Berries, Simon and Jeff Walton are here, and my own firm, Murray Harcourt. But on top of that, we're delighted to welcome our new partners. We've got the Institute of Directors, represented by Rose Riley, thebusinessdesk.com, Ben Ormsby, the editor, local editor is here, WPA Healthcare, Jeff Baskin. Unfortunately, Simon Gray of Boost Drinks can't be with us, but we're very grateful that Boost have joined us. And last but not least, Manning Stainton, Russell Manning is with us. So thanks to all those who make these meetings possible. In talking about our sponsors, it would be remiss of me not to mention, and with great pleasure and on your behalf, our joint sponsor, Big Change, and its founder, serial entrepreneur and a really good egg, Martin Port, on raising an investment of £75 million from Great Hill Partners, a US private equity house, valuing the company at 100 million. I've known Martin for many years, and he is a good friend. His entrepreneurial skill, hard work, sincere care for all his staff and customers, and support for the community, and last but not least for Israel, is to be highly commended. And of course, he's been supported throughout by his very patient wife, Mandy, and all his family. He's an absolute credit to the whole community and the city of Leeds, and is widely admired around here. Before I mention our new initiative, I'd just like to remind everybody that UK-Israel Business' mission is to encourage bilateral trade between the UK and Israel. We want to encourage more companies in our region to consider trading with Israel, especially now that Brexit is upon us. So, a new and exciting initiative. As most of you will remember from our last panel meeting with Leeds expats now living and working in Israel, one of the panelists was John Sumroy, inventor of the MyFold folding child's car seat. When we asked him if he knew of someone who could prepare a monthly letter from Israel, a bit like the old Alistair Cook letter from America, he immediately suggested Paul Ulster, another very talented Leeds expat, whom I know, but I haven't seen him for about 30 years or so. So I got in touch with Paul, and I'm delighted to say he's joined us today. And he's kindly prepared his inaugural letter from Israel, which will be sent out to you in the next few days. I've had the privilege of reading it, and I can assure you that you'll find it both interesting and entertaining. I'm really grateful to Paul for producing it. Just a little bit about Paul. He was born in Leeds, originally a broadcaster and presenter specializing in horse racing. Paul's now an Israel-based broadcast journalist with a special interest in intelligence matters, regional terror groups, and Israeli politics. He's been a regular contributor to a variety of international news websites, including the Jerusalem Report and the Daily Mail, Investigative Project on Terrorism, the Times of Israel, and was formerly Fox News's main Middle Eastern correspondent. He's a producer of and host of Real Israel, a recently launched news and current affairs YouTube channel, and it's worth having a look at that. He's also written a novel, which he will tell you about in the letter. So welcome to Paul, and thank you for agreeing to do the letter from Israel. In terms of Israel's connections with the UK at the moment, yesterday there was an all-party Britain-Israel parliamentary group dealing with healthcare collaboration. And the British healthcare sector leadership have long argued that there is not enough opportunity for innovative technologies to be deployed at scale within the NHS, and that companies continue to face hurdles when it comes to adoption and scale. This report by the APPG identifies some of these barriers and recommends ways of enhancing innovation in the NHS through leading Israeli technology. The Britain-Israel APPG looks forward to launching its landmark report on the UK-Israel health technology collaboration immediately following our departure from the EU, and the government's efforts to establish stronger trade links with leading innovation states such as Israel. So we're really pleased about that and look forward to seeing what's going to happen. A great deal has been happening in Israel since our last meeting in December. Most of you will have read that Israel has led the world in vaccinations per head of population, and a study has shown that its vaccination campaign is proving effective in preventing infection and serious illness in inoculated individuals. Also, a new coronavirus drug which successfully cured 30 cases of the disease among Israeli hospital patients has been hailed by scientists as a huge breakthrough. On the trade front, there's been £200 million worth of trade between Israel and Dubai over the past 5 months, and Israel has been exporting wine, olive oil, and honey to the UAE. Meanwhile, electric batteries capable of charging within 5 minutes have been produced for the first time by a company called StoreDot. So a lot is happening over there, and there is no end to Israeli innovation and ingenuity. So now I'm delighted to be able to introduce our speakers. First of all, Edward Ziff, who needs no introduction, is going to be talking with Julian Hartley, the Chief Executive of the Leeds Teaching Hospitals. Briefly, if I may, with Edward, he's Chairman and Chief Executive of Town Centre Securities. He's been a lifelong supporter of Leeds, the city, and Leeds United, and especially with local charities. Deservedly awarded the OBE and the honour of being a Deputy Lieutenant for the county. He's chair of the Leeds Hospital Charity, which is the charity partner of Leeds Teaching Hospitals. So we're very grateful to Ed for arranging for Julian to be with us today. Julian Hartley is the Chief Executive of the Leeds Teaching Hospitals. His career, he started working in a number of NHS management posts, and was board director at North Tees and Hartlepool's NHS Trust, where he was responsible for planning, operations and strategy. From 2005, he was chief executive of Blackpool, Fylde and Wyre Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust, seeing the trust transform and go on to achieve major financial turnaround, securing foundation trust status and becoming one of the first trusts in the country to meet the 18-week targets. In addition, Julian chaired the Northwest Leadership Academy. Julian was appointed Chief Executive University Hospital of South Manchester NHS Foundation Trust in June 2009 and led a major turnaround in MRSA reduction, A&E and 18-week performance. He's also introduced a major program of cultural change to improve patient experience and outcomes. We're delighted that Julian, who's got obviously very busy at the moment, has joined us this morning, and we're very grateful that he's managed to find time to do so. So it's now my pleasure to hand over to Edward, who will conduct the interview.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Can I just, before we start, extend my congratulations to Martin Port over his sensational deal. As you said, he is an amazing guy, and he absolutely deserves all the success that he's currently enjoying. So welcome, Julian. I'm not sure you'll necessarily thank me at the end of this, but we'll see how we go. Let me start by asking you, well, when did you arrive in Leeds, for everybody's benefit?
I started as Chief Executive of Leeds Teaching Hospitals in, I can remember the date, Edward, 14th of October 2013, so just over 7 years ago.
And for those of you who obviously follow the Leeds NHS Trust and will be users, that coincided with the Leeds NHS Trust hitting a real low point. For those of you cast your mind back, it was at about the same time that the Leeds Children's Heart Surgery facility had been sentenced to closure, and the Leeds NHS Trust was maybe a bit like the football team at the time, a laughing stock. It was at a low ebb, and Julian and his team arrived here in Leeds and set about doing the turnaround. So maybe to share with us a bit about those first steps, those first problems, and the first difficulties you had to face up to.
Yes, of course, Edward. I mean, I think the first thing to say is I've always cared deeply about Leeds. I'm a Yorkshire lad. I'm from Bingley, and I'd never worked in West Yorkshire in my career in the NHS, despite being from there. You know, I'd spent my career in the Northeast and the Northwest, and so I'd always looked at Leeds from a distance, thinking Leeds Teaching Hospitals should be, you know, one of the greatest healthcare organisations in the country in terms of its potential and the talent and the strength of the city and the people. But for a number of reasons hadn't achieved that. And in 2013, when I joined, you're absolutely right that the trust was at a low ebb. It was reeling from the closure in the Easter of 2013 of the Children's Heart Surgery Unit, the temporary closure, on the back of a report. And that had immediately followed, of course, the judicial review of the original decision to close the unit altogether. So it was incredibly turbulent, on top of which the inquiry into the activities of Jimmy Savile were underway. The trust was suffering from financial difficulties, poor performance, a spate of sort of inquiries from the Care Quality Commission, as well as a pretty disastrous financial position with a £100 million deficit. So it wasn't a great sort of set of cards to be dealt coming into the job, but I got no doubt at all that there was the potential for you know, turnaround and for improvement and really to sort of put Leeds where it should be. So that was the spirit in which I joined the organisation, and then the real work began with myself and the team, and it was a refreshed team. And obviously, Linda Pollard had joined as chair a month or two before me, and had set about changing the board. So together, Linda and I faced a pretty Herculean task, but one that we were both really motivated for and both felt incredibly passionately about. And Linda, of course, is a proud Yorkshire woman, and coincidentally enough also went to Bingley Grammar School. So I think we had an immediate sort of
not at the same time, I hasten to
not at the same time. No. So I think we both had a strong sense of, you know, shared shared drive and determination to really change things. Yeah.
So I know Linda well. I've known her a long time through connections with the university and the like, and she is a very dynamic, getting lady. I came across her, and just at the time that our youngest son had a quite a lengthy stay in the LGI, and I think at that time that sort of coincided with when I fell in love with the NHS, when they saved his life. And I remember making the mistake of asking Linda, can I do anything to make it right? And at that time she said, yeah, we want to turn the Leeds Teaching Hospitals Charitable Foundation into something a bit more different. And that's where we first came across each other. What I was struck by was the amazing sort of root and branches attitude of staff in the NHS, and the culture that, despite all the problems that were going on, despite all the issues you had to deal with, the genuine desire to care. Can you sort of take me through a bit of how that feels and felt?
Yeah, absolutely, Edward, and you're absolutely right. I think the big challenge, and I think the thing I've learned through my career is, and I think this probably goes for any organization, but particularly in a hospital, in a healthcare organization, is that the leadership absolutely must engage with the people, the staff, the people at the front line. And that's obviously doctors, nurses, but it's also all of the support staff. It's the porters and cleaners and catering assistants. It's the whole team. I remember when I did my, after university, I did the NHS management training scheme, and I worked in a hospital in Sunderland, and I did every job there was to do in the hospital, one from being a cleaner, porter, following a doctor around, but spending time in a consultant clinics, just to see everything. And what really struck me and still stays with me is the huge number of roles, literally hundreds of different roles that come together in one place to make a hospital work and ultimately deliver good outcomes and experience for our patients. That's what we're all there for. And so the role of leadership in a hospital is to harness that sense of that culture, that positive endeavor to really deliver for patients and to make the difference. Now, I'd had some experience of doing that in other hospitals, but Leeds really needed it, because I'd done some groundwork ahead of joining, and the reported experience of a lot of staff was that they felt a bit disconnected. They didn't know what was going on. They felt the trust was a bit rudderless. They didn't see the senior leadership wasn't visible. So we embarked on a sort of, as you say, root and branch, thorough kind of approach to strengthening and developing that culture. And we used an interesting technique. We used something called crowdsourcing, which some of you will be familiar with, but it's essentially where you're able to get feedback from, all 18,000 staff, because the trust is a big trust. There's 6 hospitals, 18,000 staff, £1.2 billion turnover. And getting to all of those staff meant we needed to use some innovation and different approach. So we use crowdsourcing, which is essentially where through your PC, iPhone, iPad, you can access the questions that we're asking. In this case, what do you think we need to do to improve Leeds Teaching Hospitals? What kind of place do you think it needs to be to work? What are the key values and behaviours we need? And everyone had the chance to respond, and everyone could see what everyone else had said, and you could do it anonymously. And that process that we ran for a few weeks, and we got loads of staff together at Ellen Road, and it's funny actually, because now it's a vaccination centre. And I look back 7 years, and we had the NHS there talking about how we were going to improve the future of Leeds Teaching Hospitals. But we got everyone together and we introduced them to crowdsourcing, and we started a very deliberate process of creating our culture. And that became what we call the Leeds Way. And the Leeds Way is 7 years later still our kind of North Star, our guiding light, our way of doing things. It is very much how we work together. And it's very clear and simple. and it defines who we are, what we do, how we work. Now, I'd argue strongly that, and the evidence suggests this, the more engaged your staff are, your teams are, the better the performance of the organisation in terms of, in our case, outcomes for patients, but also financial performance and progress against waiting time targets and so on. And we spent a lot of time getting out there, being visible, communicating, spending time with the front line. I spent my first 100 days visiting every part of the hospital and just trying to ensure that we got a very, very different feel and approach to harness the latent talent, discretionary effort. And it really worked because that led us to improving our CQC rating, going from requires improvement to good. Our staff survey has improved year on year. Our financial position has turned around from a £100 million deficit to we posted a £50 million surplus last year. So, and obviously, Edward, with the support of the charity, which has gone great guns in terms of raising important funds for key pieces of equipment and other things, and crucially supporting our staff in line with the Leeds way. So those are the key components and elements that I think have helped us make the changes.
To me, hearing you speak about it, but it sounds incredibly obvious. You sort of wonder why that didn't happen before. I mean, I remember at the time you introduced quite a simple thing. Hello, I am, and everybody has. I was looking for my
hello, my name is. Yes.
Hello, my name is.
Yes.
Just an obvious thing that you're going to talk to somebody, particularly sometimes in a life and death situation, and you don't know the name of the person you're talking to, and they don't even think to introduce themselves. Properly.
Exactly. That, and we've got. You're absolutely right, Edward, and we've got Kate Granger actually to thank for that. And Kate was sadly no longer with us, of course. Kate died of a life-limiting cancer about 4 years ago now. But Kate was fantastic because Kate was a patient with us, but she was also a doctor with us. And she noticed that sometimes staff didn't, when she was a patient, staff didn't always introduce themselves. They'd say, hello, I'm the doctor, I'm the nurse. Or can you see the lady in bed 7? And that impersonal way of she felt jarred, wasn't right. And so the Hello, My Name Is campaign that she introduced really, really helped us. And in fact, it took off beyond Leeds. It took off across the whole NHS. And every Monday morning when I do induction for our new starters, I always start with, hello, my name is Julian, and the hello, my name is Monica, and all of and that does, and you're right, people wear the badges, and I think it does give the personal touch, the compassionate care, and it's what you'd want, isn't it, as a patient or as one of your loved ones in hospital, to know they were getting that personal attention. Staff were paying attention to the small things that make a difference, and you create that human relationship.
So if we can just move and talk a bit about the fabric of it's not 2 hospitals, there's a number of hospitals in the Leeds NHS Trust. I mean, if I go back to my own memories, the Children's Oncology and Haematology unit was actually state-of-the-art, brand new, being financed by a Teenage Cancer Trust that spent a lot of money on it, no money, no object, and was amazing. At the same time, my father-in-law was sadly entering sort of final time in his life and suffering with sort of dementia and geriatric issues. And some of the wards, 200 yards away from the children's unit, you expected you opened a cupboard and maybe Florence Nightingale might have walked out. I mean, they are literally that old Gilbert Scott building, and some of the wards in there still look like that, even to this day, that some of them aren't in use. But a huge challenge to deal with such a big estate and deal with the good and the bad and also the ugly there.
Absolutely, Edward, absolutely. I mean, I guess you look back through the mists of time and remember the Leeds General Infirmary was actually founded in 1767, I think, in a small house near Kirkgate Market, and then obviously moved to Infirmary Street, and then up to, in 1868, the new infirmary, built on Great George Street by Gilbert Scott with help from Florence Nightingale. And in fact, the first 3 months of the infirmary, it opened as an art gallery to raise money for the hospital. And we had the first sort of major provincial medical school outside London, built around the same time, which is now the pathology laboratory. But when you go up there, you recognise the architecture, and actually it's not dissimilar when you look at the architecture to St Pancras, which of course is another Gilbert Scott architectural sort of marvel. And it's wonderful to have that history, but of course it's not 21st century medicine, and we're proud of the history, and we've done a lot to celebrate and recognise the history, but we also know that to deliver 21st century healthcare, we've got to move out of there and improve and develop. And so we have, we've taken all of the kind of clinical care out of that part of the LGI. And we, over the years, certainly the last few years, have been able to spend more on our capital fabric and infrastructure because of our improving financial position. In the NHS, and NHS finances, as you know, Edward, aren't straightforward. But suffice to say, if you improve your revenue position, you've got more to spend on capital. So we've been doing that consistently over the years. And this year we spent a record £80 million on capital. When I joined the trust, we were barely spending £10 million a year on capital, and it just didn't touch the sides in terms of what we were able to do. So consequently, we had huge sort of problems with out-of-date equipment and so on. We're in a much better position now in terms of investing in capital, and the number of schemes that we've actually done, not just the big schemes that are in the pipeline, but the number of schemes we've already done that have made a huge difference. You'll remember us opening the hybrid laboratory, which is amazing. If any of you have been to the LGI recently and you walk down past Martin Wing and towards the back of Jubilee Wing, you can see by the pathology laboratory, that sort of edifice. It looks a bit like a tripod out of War of the Worlds, but it's connected to the Jubilee Wing, and it contains the hybrid scanner, which is fantastic, which gives us the combination of imaging while the surgeons are operating, and it's a wonderful boon to our work with children and indeed adults. It can serve both, and that's an example of the kind of thing we've been able to do, as well as the support we've had from the charity, where we've been able, and Edward, you raised a lot of money for us in that regard in terms of various equipment, and all of the work we've done on MRI scans and in robots in urology and so on. Many innovations on the capital front that have really enabled to put, frankly, Leeds in a position of offering some world-class care in terms of the state-of-the-art equipment that we've got. Now, that's where we should be, and that was my desire for Leeds in the first place, that we get to that point, and that we are now. It's great to see that's happening, but we can't be complacent because there was much more we want to do. So the big plan, of course, to remedy the situation you're describing, is that we felt we needed to actually have a new children's hospital for Leeds and a new adults wing of the LGI, because the great as it is clinically, the children's hospital, and you've paid tribute to it already, it is within outdated and cramped accommodation. And frankly, Leeds, people know about, don't they, Great Ormond Street. I think I can remember your anecdote, Edward, where you described people raising money for Great Ormond Street in Millennium Square in Leeds, and you were saying, well, why what are they doing here? Why aren't I putting money in the tin for Leeds?
Yeah,
Children's
you're quite right.
Hospital?
I mean, the Leeds Children's Hospital, I think, was one of the best kept secrets. And I mean, turning to the fundraising issue, the Leeds Hospitals Charities, we're now known, set off life more as a grant giving than a fundraising organisation, and we've changed that round. And you very kindly say that help raise money. Some of it's actually been really easy to raise, and I'm thinking aloud. I remember it was as a result of the sort of LIBOR fines.
Yes,
I got a text, and I wish it would have been my idea actually, and it wasn't. It was actually Fiona Campbell, who's a paediatrician in the trust and a senior member of the Children's Hospital team. I know Fiona and her family very well, and she sent me a text. She said, I've just been listening to the budget, and the Chancellor has given money to Sheffield, Birmingham, and another one of the children's hospitals in the UK from these LIBOR fines. Why haven't we got any? And I rang up and asked, why haven't we got any? Well, we hadn't even asked for any of the money. So that's number one lesson. If you don't ask, you certainly don't get.
Absolutely.
And I wrote to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I got a phone call back about a month later. And about 2 months later, after we sent in the application form, we got £1.5 million, which was actually the funding for the hybrid facility that you spoke about. And actually, the Jewish community actually is quite good at fundraising. And you know, coming from where I come from, I've sort of come from a part of the community that's not frightened to ask, but also quick to give. Interestingly, and actually for the NHS. Fundraising is something that right now is obviously very popular. You know, very sadly, Captain Sir Tom passed away last week. You know, what an amazing thing, and that shows the public spirit towards the NHS at the moment. And so, just moving our conversation on, and clearly, I'd like to talk about the redevelopment and maybe come to that a bit later, but. Take us through a bit of the challenges that you've had to deal with around COVID, around. I mean, the last 12 months for everybody's been a nightmare, but your nightmares are real ones. Ours, you know, we can wake up from some now and again. So, you know,
indeed, and just to say, actually, you know, to everyone on the call, a huge thank you for your support to Leeds Teaching Hospitals through this period. We've had wonderful support from the Jewish community across the city, and the supporting of Light at Leeds at the LGI from the United Hebrew congregation who made it special with gifts, and all of the generosity from businesses, and great support as well, of course, from our chaplaincy team and Albie Chait, who's part of that team. So that, you know, it does feel very much, Edward, like a real sort of Team Leeds effort, and the Jewish community's played a huge part in supporting us. I think you mentioned Captain Tom, and of course he played his part, didn't he, for the whole NHS, raising millions. And we've actually got, if you go into the once we're able to move around freely, and some of you may have friends, family who need to be in and around St James, but in the Bexley wing, Leeds Cancer Centre at St James, we've recently installed a lovely bust of Captain Tom, and it was quite moving actually, because when the news of his death reached us last week, spontaneously, you know, lots of flowers appeared around the base of his bust, and it was quite a moving moment. And he, of course, opened the Nightingale Hospital, which we as Leeds Teaching Hospitals run. We've
in Harrogate.
In Harrogate, we've got a local management team in there. But Captain Sir Tom opened the Nightingale Hospital for us, and that was a very important moment. Yes, I mean, turning to the challenges of the last year and the pandemic, I don't think any of us have, and probably speak for all of us, not just in the NHS, but across the whole of the city and the country, have ever experienced a time like it, in terms of a public health crisis that has changed the way we live. And the impact on the NHS has been huge, and it's really gone in three big phases. You know, we had phase one, which was when we went into the first lockdown back in March, April of last year, and that was when we were dealing with much of the unknown. And fortunately in Leeds, we had the chance to really prepare well, because that wave started, if you remember, in London, and then moved northwards. I remember talking to my chief executive colleagues in London, particularly at King's College Hospital, about what they were going through, and realised we probably got about 10 days to 2 weeks to get ready for what they were experiencing there. So we spent that time preparing everything in terms of training for a wide number of staff on respiratory care, looking at how we can convert operating theatres into critical care units, because we were expecting large numbers of patients in critical care, looking at our oxygen flows to make sure we got the right levels of oxygen, doing all of the, getting the personal protective equipment, stocks, and just all that preparation going on, fitting people for masks and getting ready for the first wave. And that first wave happened. And what was interesting about that first wave was that we'd done all that preparation, but it wasn't perhaps as it wasn't as bad as we were expecting. Actually, we managed through that, and we prepared well, and we were able to get through that. But you also perhaps remember that we had a national instruction to virtually cancel everything but COVID. So we'd cancelled most other activity, postponed that because that we were clearing the hospital for COVID patients. So consequently, we actually didn't have as many patients in the hospital as we normally would, because patients weren't coming for their usual operations or treatment, and we were devoted to COVID. So that the experience of the first wave was very different to then what happened just after the summer into September, October, November, when we faced the second peak, the second wave, which really was tough for us in the north. And again, you perhaps remember that was the period where places like Manchester, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, the Northeast, the Midlands were hit really hard with the second wave. And in the first wave, we had 219 inpatients at the peak. In the second wave, that was 324. So it was significantly higher then.
And where are you now then?
Well, now we're in the third wave, which sort of hit us in kind of January, February, with the new variant that we know about from Kent. And we're currently at 240 inpatients. But this time round, interestingly, the highest number of patients in critical care, with 93 patients in critical care. And if you bear in mind our standard sort of capacity for critical care is 50, we're well above that. We've gone into sort of super surge levels with converting operating theatres into critical care units, redeploying staff from theatres and anaesthetics to work in critical care. It really is a pressured time.
And are those skills easily transferred? And is that really challenging? And you'll be losing staff through illness as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that so what we rely on is obviously anaesthetists, and we have probably around 120 anaesthetists across the trust. A number of those are trained in critical care in ICU. Others are mostly will anaesthetise patients undergoing surgery. However, all anaesthetists are trained in life support and so on, can act as critical care doctors and are able to do that. So that's why we need to stand down elective surgery in order for those anaesthetists to then support critical care, along with nursing staff, support staff, and of course we train them and do refresher training and so on for them to take up those positions in order to create the capacity to treat those patients. Yes.
So another thing that we've obviously all read in the paper is how dramatically reduced cancer diagnosis has been over the last few months. And clearly there isn't a reduction in the actual disease. It's just knowing about who's got the disease. And I was chatting to Professor David Sebag Montefiore recently, and I said, so what are you going to do when that wave hits you? And he sort of shrugs his shoulders and he says, well, we'll deal with it as best we can, which is what everybody in the Leeds NHS says. But is that a real crisis that's about to come our way, about theatres that we haven't really realised about yet?
Yeah, what I'd stress, Edward, is that we continued with cancer care and treatment through the pandemic. Through all three waves, we've been able to continue with oncology, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and so on. We've been able to manage that, which is so important. Where we along with many other parts of the NHS have struggled is obviously patients that need an operation because of what I've said, but we've continued with urgent operations that are necessary in terms of the time. We've had to postpone some operations that aren't as critical time in terms of timing. So we categorize, we prioritize and triage operations into P1, the urgents that we've carried on doing and have never stopped, and the ones that are time critical for cancer patients, P2s that are the next level down, and then P3s and 4s. 3s and 4s are the ones that have got mostly cancelled as a consequence, but they're ones that can be rearranged without affecting the patient's prognosis or outcomes. However, you'd want to do them, obviously. We'd want to get back to doing those quickly. So that's the group that we've got a big backlog of that we're going to have to work through over the coming months.
I've got a few questions that have been coming through, which I'd like to just deal with those now, and then come back to maybe the redevelopment of the hospital to finish with. So Paul Gross has asked a question. He said, I've always wondered why a new purpose-built, environmentally friendly hospital building isn't built on the St James's site and the surrounding area. That would enable all hospital provision to be on the same site and thereby reduce duplication of overheads. The expensive city centre property where LGI is sited could be sold to raise substantial funds towards the capital cost of a new hospital. In 3 minutes, please.
Great question.
You've been here,
Great question.
7 years?
That's a really, sorry, Edward, who asked that question?
Paul Gross asked that question.
Paul, that's a great question, Paul. And really interesting because we absolutely explored that option. And interestingly, there was originally a plan some years, I mean, I
10
think
years ago,
back
probably
as
15
far as
years
2000, ago. There was this idea of doing exactly that, of building around the St James's site and creating a sort of super hospital there. And however, what became apparent with the business case was it was unaffordable in the context of the Department of Health weren't prepared to support it, the Treasury weren't prepared to support it. There were challenges even with that area in terms of space and scope of getting it in there, and the project just didn't go anywhere. It didn't it didn't get support, and it wasn't doable, and the costs were beyond anyone's ability in government to support. So that didn't happen. So when we came to think about our redevelopment, we looked back at that, and we looked at that as an option, and in the end came to the same conclusion that we weren't going to get support for that. So our focus obviously switched to what we could do, particularly around children's and also adults, in terms of expanding critical care and developing services and so on. And actually, the split between St James and LGI does work well. We've got major trauma and surgical services down at the LGI with children's. We've got cancer and transplant and medicine up at St James. And we are developing St James. We're building a brand new pathology laboratory. Just last week, I was doing some interviews with the media, stood as we were demolishing parts of the St James's site down towards the sort of end of Dolly Lane end of the site, where some of the staff residences have been, and we're having a state-of-the-art pathology laboratory built there, which will bring together laboratory. That will enable us to free up the old medical school at the LGI, where pathology is currently situated. So it's not just about the LGI; it's a whole kind of trust reconfiguration that is really going to help us. And actually, we're still going to benefit from the redevelopment of the city centre in terms of developing the innovation district, because having a brand new children's hospital on a much smaller footprint, because we'll build upwards, means that we can use the existing site of where the Clarendon wing is, together with all of that area around it, to create the innovation district to release 5 hectares of estate in the city centre.
There's actually a YouTube video which maybe I'll ask Jane to circulate to the participants, which shows the Gilbert Scott estate, a part of the estate, and what you've got in mind for it, which is amazing.
Absolutely, and it's huge, Edward, isn't it? Because we estimate that development, that innovation district, the future economic contribution of the site of between 5.5 to 11 billion net present value and 3,000 jobs created is a massive win for the city. So I think we are managing to sort of create a win-win, Paul, between the redevelopment and the contribution that we can make to support that through the economy and developing the innovation district.
On the innovation district, Colin, who you met before we started, said, as someone who's involved in medtech and medical supply companies, I'm concerned that smaller companies, often innovative companies, don't get a fair chance in terms of NHS procurement. What are your views? And I just wondered whether you might just talk about that, and whether being part of the innovation district might lead to greater partnership with smaller companies. And I know there's a huge partnership you've got with the university. If you can maybe just talk a bit about that.
Indeed, no, it's a great point, Colin. I think that we are actually already trying to do a lot more in terms of local procurement. So, for example, during the pandemic, personal protective equipment was a real issue. Yeah, I'm sure you'll all remember the probleming sufficient PPE. And I can remember it was Easter weekend, myself and Simon Worthington, finance director at the trust and also overseas procurement, we were really concerned about where we were with our PPE stock and the lack of supplies nationally. So we turned the whole of the finance department and the procurement department into a sort of call center over that weekend. And we hit the phones and got onto businesses in Leeds. And it was great because we got great support from businesses in Leeds, including a company that helped make visors, and we got gowns, and from then on, really, we've focused quite a much more on local businesses to help support our procurement efforts. And increasingly, we're trying to gear our procurement locally where we can. Obviously, we're restricted somewhat by the national procurement approach, where, as you say, go to big contracts with big national players. But we do think there's room to do more locally, and we're very interested in partnerships with local companies and businesses on innovation. And we've got a lot of work going on with the academic health partnership with the university and innovation to look at how we can do that and develop that. And businesses in Leeds have made a big contribution to the NHS during the course of this pandemic.
Thank you. I've got a couple of other questions, but maybe if you could just talk a little bit about the university and the hospital. I mean, I'm not sure everybody necessarily understands what the definition of a teaching hospital is. So from the most basic, sort of quickly cover some of that.
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right, Edward. We are Leeds Teaching Hospitals, which means we are a hospital that teaches and trains all of our, doctors, nurses, physios, OTs, that whole range. But specifically in terms of our work with the University of Leeds, but we also work very closely, of course, with Leeds Beckett and other higher education institutions. We're the teaching hospital, and traditionally, of course, as I mentioned, we were one of the first teaching hospitals outside London back in 1868, and with one of the first medical schools. So we have incredibly close links with the medical school at Leeds. We've got undergraduates that come and learn in the trust from year 3 onwards, and we've got obviously a lot of doctors joining us from Leeds, from the medical school. That partnership obviously very much around education, but then we also have a key partnership with the university on research. So education and research go hand in hand, and in Leeds we do a lot of research, and we lead the way in many areas on research. And so lots of our consultants are also what we, clinical academics. So they're clinical, they're treating patients, but they're also professors or lecturers. They're doing research, they're teaching, and they're contributing to the university and the trust. And at the highest level of governance, we have the Joint Partnership Board, which is where we sit down together, myself and the Vice Chancellor of the university, together with our team, and the Dean of the Medical School, and Phil Wood, our Medical Director. And we in fact, we're doing that on Friday. We sit down, we talk, and we go through our strategic plans. And increasingly, we've come really closely together to have a single research strategy. We have an academic health partnership, which brings together other partners across the city. And it's really good. I mean, it's great to join forces in that way, because we rely on one another, and it's a really symbiotic relationship. So it's a very important part of what we're about.
Thank you. So Stephen Mitchell has asked a couple of questions, if I can read them both to you. Can you explain how revenues were increased from 10 million on capital spend to 80 million? Is it purely fundraising, or can individual trusts bring in their own income in competition to other trusts? Is the first part. And then he says, who should he contact, or who smaller medical and surgical companies, who should they speak to in terms of offering their business services?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great question. So on the last question, the last point, contact Chris Slater, who is our head of procurement. Chris is a great guy, and Chris will be delighted, I'm sure, Chris and his team, to kind of look through what can be done on that front. I haven't got Chris's email to hand, although if you give me, let me just see.
Well, if you let me, I know Stephen very well.
I can, yeah.
If you send it to me, I'll forward it on. I may even have Chris's details.
Chris.slater1@nhs.net. How's that?
Okay.
There you go. So on the second question, the way NHS finances work is, no, it wasn't all about fundraising for capital. Obviously, we benefit from the generosity and fundraising from Leeds Cares, but the bulk of what we spend is from core NHS resources. And the way that it works is that as a trust, over recent years, the NHS brought in a different financial regime that meant that if you were able to hit your revenue target, i.e. not overspend, and indeed if you were able to exceed your target, if you did better than what they asked you to achieve, then you were rewarded. And we have been able to exceed our target over the last few years. That in turn means that you are given more money to spend on capital. Your ability to spend on capital is a function of how well you do on revenue performance. And so that's where we've generated the money. And it hasn't been at the expense of other hospitals who've lost out as a result of us. It has genuinely been about the way that money's been distributed nationally to trusts as a consequence of us responding well to being more efficient, reducing waste, and I guess, running a tighter ship in terms of financials. And that's been a huge team effort, and one that everyone's really responded to. And our finance director, Simon Worthington, I'm sure would be delighted to sort of take you through how we've done that, because it's been a very, very deliberate and intensive process. And it's one that we've talked actually a fair bit, Edward, to the trustees about, isn't it? Sure. In terms of, how we've worked, and also the support of the hospital charity for when we get to the year end, and get us up to help support, that effort to reap the reward of better performance on the finances.
When I first, just on that, when I first joined, the outgoing chairman said to me that we need to be independent of the NHS Trust, which I didn't really quite understand what that meant. And I think his definition was, if the NHS wanted X, we needed to do Y. And it was, and actually what we ended up doing was working very well with Dave Berridge, who I know is just retiring just now, but he gave us great insight into what you needed most. And
Yes.
he produced for us a list of the sort of the top 10 things that you needed that were at sort of the margin of being able to afford or not afford, and we could pick up with those. And it was sort of the start of how our relationship with the NHS started to develop. We don't always get it right, but we try.
Yeah.
And doing the things that you need, you know, and
yeah,
having a
absolutely.
charity that acts independently. Well, sure, we're independent.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Edward. And I think the other thing as well as that, I think the thing that our staff have noticed over the period of your stewardship of the charity has been the way in which they're being looked after, you know, the extra things, you know, the boxes that were sent out over the festive period, the importance of the Time to Shine awards, the things that make a difference to staff in terms of their experience, and also the support for their health and well-being.
Yeah.
Give at a time when mental health and emotional, psychological well-being is so important, that's being strongly supported. And sometimes, you know, people immediately think, don't they, about hospital charities, about equipment and kit and so on. Actually, some of the most important things are about that support to staff so that they can keep going and they can keep delivering for patients.
The one thing that I would say that we work very closely. We've got a research and development team of our own who work very closely with the hospital staff, and I think that's that understanding of the needs. You know, I think back to myself, you know, when we first came into lockdown and came to work at home, the weather was nice. It was a bit of a novelty working from home. And I never really thought, well, you know, a lot of people were telling me, putting my property hat on, oh, the days of the office is finished. You know, people are going to work from home. I think now we've had a winter at home. It's a very different thing, and I know in our own business, mental health is very important in terms of supporting staff and getting that across and that message across. I think we're all going to have to learn to live life maybe slightly differently and maybe a bit more balanced. I've got a couple more questions, and I'd like to talk to you about the new developments. And my son Benjamin has put here a question for Julian. In an ideal world, how do you see the partnership working between MIT in Boston and the Leeds University and the Teaching Hospital Trust? So he's part of this MIT REAP program.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you could maybe just say a little bit about that.
Yeah. Hi, Ben. Yeah, absolutely. I've been fortunate to have some involvement in the MIT REAP, which, for those that aren't, Massachusetts Institute of Technology Regional Entrepreneurial Accelerator Program. And the contribution we can make to that, I think, is about how we, as a big employer in Leeds, you know, we employ over 18,000 staff. We spend £1.2 billion a year providing healthcare for people of Leeds, West Yorkshire, the whole of the north of England for our specialist services, is very much about how we can be a catalyst, an anchor institution, if you like, in the city, but also a catalyst for medical technology, innovation, health technology, pharmaceutical development. There's a whole range. I think one of the growth areas of the economy, certainly in this country, is health tech. And on all fronts, I think there's some potential for us to team clinical academics with entrepreneurs and to develop things like remote monitoring. During the pandemic, we've seen some acceleration of innovation on things like capsular endoscopy, which is done remotely, where people who need a photograph of their insides swallow a pill that's got a camera in it, and it takes a photograph as it makes its way through, and out the other end, sent to the hospital, analysed without the patient having to come in at all. You know, things, that innovation like that we can continue to develop, but look to the horizon and say, what's healthcare of the 22nd century going to look like, and how do we start to think through that now? So all of those things, I think, can help with potential business startups that can be supported by being co-located by a major teaching hospital and university. So those are the areas where I think we can perhaps make a difference and a contribution. And given the exciting development of a state-of-the-art children's hospital and adults hospital, I think, you know, we want those hospitals to be digital by design. We want them to be the best they can be in terms of innovation and latest thinking. And I think that our entrepreneurs and our innovators can really help us with that. And of course, MIT bring world-class kind of understanding of how you put those ingredients together and make it happen.
I've got two other questions. One goes right back to the very beginning. Anujat, what made the difference in turning around the financial performance in the backdrop of increasing volumes?
Yeah, so I think that what made the difference was redefining the proposition around, you know, I talked about the Leeds way, and the Leeds way is about being patient-centered, accountable, fair, empowered, collaborative, and the point about people that are working in hospitals, healthcare staff, is if you go to them and say you're behind on your cost improvement program, you need to find another £10,000, it's not, you know, not interested, not going to mean a great deal. However, you go to them and say, tell me about all the things that are wasteful in your ward and what really drives you mad in terms of inefficiency. Oh, well, that takes ages to arrive. We've got all that rubbish over there. We've got oversupply of dressings and not enough of this. They know what waste is about. They understand waste. They see it every day. What we did was we tapped into using what we call the Leeds improvement method, which we learned from a hospital in America in Seattle called Virginia Mason. And it uses the principles of lean methods that go back to Taiichi Ohno and Toyota. But essentially, we trained people in lean and waste reduction. And there are 7 types of waste, as Taiichi Ohno would testify. And then what you do is you connect the actual real experience of staff at ward level, doctors, nurses, and all the colleagues that work together there, to change how they work. And they do it themselves. And what we've managed to do is release a huge amount in savings as a result of being more efficient and reducing waste. And that's engaged people. And that's now part of how we work. So a lot of the savings we've made have been about reducing waste, and that's how we've encouraged people. And the other part of waste is wasting operating time. So we've now been able to put more patients on the operating list safely as a consequence of redesigning processes and reducing the time that patients are waiting to come in and being in the anaesthetic room and prepped for an operation. And just as you would analyze any process and look at every element of that process on a big flip chart with all of your staff together, because only those people doing the work can improve the work. And that's the approach that we take and that's working.
Thank you. So moving on to the sort of children's hospital and the redevelopment, David Israel's asked, in these challenging times for business, what opportunities do Edward and Julian see for businesses to be able to support exceptional Leeds charities such as the Children's Hospital? So maybe if you could talk a little bit about the redevelopments. I always used to walk past what I reckoned was the most expensive tennis court in the whole of the UK. Behind the wall opposite the Civic Hall, for those of them who never noticed, there used to be, until about 6 weeks ago, a tennis court. I don't think there'd actually been a tennis ball hit in anger or otherwise, probably for about 50 years, but you could still see the net, you could still see the markings.
I know.
There it was, sitting right in the city centre, 50 feet from the Civic Hall in a very prime location. And obviously the diggers are now there. They're beginning to take down the nursery, or they're probably not quite well on now with taking down the nurse's home. Tell us a bit more about the Children's Hospital, the cost, and then maybe I can talk a bit about fundraising.
We never did get that valedictory game of tennis on that court, did we, Edward? Never mind. But that's right. It's really exciting. We were delighted that our scheme was selected among 5 others about a year and a half ago now. I remember getting the call from the Secretary of State as I was driving my daughter back to university down to Birmingham, and he told me that our scheme had got the green light, which is the biggest of all of them, actually. So it's the biggest scheme nationally. £600 million development of a new Leeds Children's Hospital on the site of the old nurses' home. And some of you may have seen, as Edward said, on Look North, and even as you walk past, the building that was known as Sunnybank being demolished. We'll start taking down the old nurses' home as well. That area there will make way for the new Children's Hospital and the extension to the Adults Hospital. So 2 hospitals, essentially, Children's Hospital, new Adults Hospital, connected to the Jubilee Wing, which will make way, which will mean we can demolish and create the innovation district around the area of the Clarendon Wing, repurpose the lovely listed buildings, Gilbert Scott area, and so on. And it's really exciting because it's going to give us the opportunity to have genuinely world-class care and treatment for our children, and indeed expand and develop our adults services, particularly in relation to critical care capacity that we need more of, neurosciences, cardiovascular, and so on. And for the Children's Hospital, it's going to be, well, I would say, you know, the best children's hospital in the country, if not Europe. And then we're excited about the opportunity to engage with. We've already started engaging with architects, developers, and so on. But we need, as part of that, to have the charitable component, to raise money for the things that the NHS can't pay for all the things that are really going to make it special for children and families. So we've set ourselves a goal to raise around £20 million for the Children's Hospital as part of that endeavour. And we'd be delighted, obviously, as we develop the campaign with Edwards and the charity, for those of you that are on the call that are interested, for you to be part of helping us, raise those funds and support that endeavour, and just use all of the networks we can, because I think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for everyone to, particularly post-pandemic, to celebrate and look forward to a new era, a new chapter for the care of children and indeed adults across the whole of the region.
So, I mean, on the fundraising, I'll start with an amusing story that I was chatting to a friend of mine last night who had noticed that we wanted to raise, he thought, £25,000 for the charity contribution towards the thing. And he said, I'll give you a fifth of the money. And I said, what, 25 million? He said, no, 25,000. I'll give you £5,000. So I said, I haven't rung you up. Unfortunately, it had some illness in his family, and I was ringing to find out how they were. But I said I wouldn't have the cheek to ask for £5 million. But equally, I'm not sure I'm going to accept £5,000 as being sufficient. But I mean, the fundraise thing, it falls into 2 parts: the 25 million that you're talking about, and then our team have been working with some of the serious bright minds in the NH Trust, in particular Adam Glazer, who in our community is quite well known, about the genetic thing that he wants to add to it, and build an extra floor to become a world leading centre for genetic research. And we've engaged some quite top level researchers around fundraising to help us. And I mean, early signs are we've sort of, I think we've sort of raised about 3 or 4 million quid so far, but clearly it's a huge ask. I go back to going with Simon's predecessor, who sadly, as you know, passed away. He took me to see Alderhay about 3 weeks before it was due to be opened, and I mean, remarkable what the NHS in Liverpool did for the Alderhay Children's Hospital, which is, I mean, it probably is world leading, and I don't see any reason why we can't do every bit as well as Liverpool has done. And from a fundraising perspective, we are just at the early stages of planning the programme. We've just appointed someone who will probably be known to many of the people on the call, Michael Beverley, to chair the Capital Appeal Board, and we're very hopeful and confident. I mean, a children's hospital shouldn't be a difficult ask, and coordinate that with the love that the British people now seem to have for the NHS. We're hoping that the recipe will be for a very good and successful outcome. I mean, working with your people, that they are so driven and so switched on with this, it's remarkable. So, you know, fingers crossed, we're at the start, but as you say, anybody on this call who wants to be in touch with me, I'm more than happy to embrace those offers of help. In closing, I mean, what about the future? Just take us through sort of some of your blue sky thinking for where we go from here.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think first thing I'd say is we've got a mountain to climb to recover from COVID, particularly all those things we've not been able to do while we've been dealing with COVID. So we will have significantly longer waiting times as a consequence of this, and that's nationally. That's the stage. We actually in Leeds, we've probably done better than a lot of places, but we've still got a big challenge to overcome. There's also some innovation and learning from COVID. You know, the number of outpatient appointments we've been able to do virtually that have worked, and that feedback from patients has been very positive, and other innovations as a consequence that we'll hold on to and keep. We've got the redevelopment, which we've already talked about, which is really exciting, that we're aiming to achieve by to the middle of this decade. And then I think the other thing I'd say, Edward, would be what this has done has really shone a light on inequalities across our city, our country. And we as a trust recognise we have a role to play in what we describe as population health, not just people that come into hospital, but people in the community who can benefit from the expertise of our staff working in partnership with GPs. We've worked really closely with GPs over the course of this pandemic, with social care, with volunteers, with business. And I describe it as an integrated approach, integrated care, this idea of having not just separate institutions, but working as one with the City Council and the university across Leeds to really think about how do we prevent ill health as well as treat it? How do we create healthier lifestyles? How do we know which citizens are at risk from cardiac, asthma, heart disease much further ahead, and be able to deal with that? So I think that's the direction we're heading in. And some of you might, you know, if you look at some global exemplars of this, there are places in the world that do this well. There are places in Israel actually that do this really well, and there's some very good examples in Israel of integrated care, of whole systems working together. There's a system in New York called Montefiore that we're impressed with, that is a hospital that effectively a hospital without walls, that works into its community and supports them. We've actually done a fair bit of that ourselves already in places like Lincoln Green, where we're supporting employment and opportunity in some of the most deprived parts of the city. So I think that's very much a direction that we'll be heading in, as well as continuing with our world-class care in some of the most specialist services like cancer, neurosciences, children's, major trauma, cardiovascular, and so on.
Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you for giving up your time. I'm sure Colin will want to say a few words. Just from me, there were half a dozen questions that I haven't been able to get to. Wayne Jackson asked one, Nick Dyson did. I'm really sorry that I haven't been able to get through them all. I have tried. This job of interviewing is new to me. I mean, I'm good at interviewing people, maybe not so good at interviewing people for new jobs, but this wasn't a job interview. And I have to say, the last thing that we of Leeds want is for Julian Hartley or any of your senior team to go to other parts of the country, because you're doing an amazing job. I love working with you, and I have to say, on a personal basis, it's a pleasure. And thank you for giving up your time. Over to you, Colin, to end the session.
Thanks very much, Edward. Look, on behalf of all the attendees, I'd like to thank both Edward and Julian for a most interesting and informative discussion. In fact, it's been so good that we've run out of time for networking, but I'll come on to that another time. Julian, it's fascinating to hear how you've turned around the Leeds Teaching Hospitals Trust, both financially and operationally, and you expertly and frankly answered the questions, and there are more that unfortunately we didn't have time for. But as you know, most people have a view on the NHS and local trusts, so I can imagine you're forever inundated with questions wherever you go. On a personal note, I was briefly involved right at the beginning with Simon Worthington trying to get ventilators on that first few days, which was quite interesting.
Yes.
And finally, the pill that you mentioned that you swab with a camera in, I think that's an Israeli invention, if I'm not mistaken. And certainly
Yes.
5 or 6 years ago, when we were on our last mission to Israel, UK Israel, we went to one of the companies that actually made this pill, and somewhere I think I might have got he gave us a sample, but there we are. So it was really fascinating. Thank you very much indeed, and wish you well on all our behalf for that. So thanks very much indeed.
Thank you
to everybody. As I say, unfortunately we haven't had time for networking. However, Jonny Ross, bless him, runs, and I've been there before, 11s is on a Friday morning between 11 and 12. He'll put a link on the chat today, or you can contact him. It's very entertaining. You meet some interesting people, so you should give it a try. That's 11 o'clock on a Friday morning for some networking. Just finally, one of our new partners, the Business Desk, and by the way, I'm delighted to see that David Parkin, one of the founders and my good friend, is on today. But the Business Desk is running a conference called Invest North on the 24th of March, a whole day conference focusing on the economic development and real estate future of the UK northern regions, bringing together decision makers and creative thinkers from government, city regions and business. I think it will be really interesting, and as you know, we partner joint partnership with the Business Desk. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you all at our next meeting. Thanks very much. Bye.
Take care.